Mark chapter 13, it should be Mark chapter 14, verses 32 to 42, and you'll find them right on the back of your program there. And I'm going to read this, and then we're going to talk about this comment that I made with respect to this passage when I preached it on Sunday morning. This is the New Revised Standard Version. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and he, Jesus, said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated. And he said to them, "I'm deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, "Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." He came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to say to him. He came a third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Now, as I preached that passage originally, for those who weren't here on that Sunday morning, what we were talking about is the way in which Jesus was able to keep God in sight while he was going through the worst possible night of his life. He was being betrayed by his closest friends. He was preparing to be turned over to Jewish authorities and then to the Romans. And then he was preparing for what was about the most torturous thing that the people of that day could imagine doing to another person. He was going to be crucified. And so whatever Jesus' life had been up to this point, there was nothing quite like this night for him. It was so bad that here in these verses, he comes to his disciples and he tells them that he is so deeply grieved that he feels like he's going to die. The anxiety is palpable. It's enormous for Jesus. And so when we talked about that sermon, we asked the question, how was Jesus able to hear God's voice and do his will in the midst of that kind of screaming fear? We talked about the patterns of Jesus' life, the way in which he didn't do anything on this night any different than any other night that he had lived and walked with God. He prayed the same prayer that he taught his disciples to pray in the Lord's Prayer, and he followed the same pattern. He went away to a quiet place and he prayed, and he encouraged his disciples to do the same. Well, in the course of preaching that sermon and pointing out all those things, and I just said this comment where I said, we shouldn't have bucket lists. That's so ungodly. And so I had people distressed over that. And I want to talk a little bit more about that because I think that the secret, if there is a secret for Jesus, to surviving the trials we have to go through, is that we have to have our eye on the right prize. We have to have our eye on the right thing. And bucket lists, and the reason that comment came out of me there, not only because of the context, but a bucket list is this list of things that we want to do here on earth before we die. And a lot of bucket lists for people have to do with experiences they want to have, places they want to go, things they want to see. What I was talking about, and I think this is so essential, is that life can be such that we are afraid to miss out on anything. You know, there's a logic to that if you don't really believe the promises God has made. And sometimes my concern, and this is what I was getting at in the sermon, is that our bucket lists reveal that we really have not put all of our eggs in God's basket. That we have this little list of things that prioritize this world, just in case this is all we have. That's what I was getting at. Not everybody's bucket list is built that way, but a lot of folks are. And I think some of it is because of a misunderstanding of what God has promised. We have done a terrible job in the church of helping people to understand the nature of the kingdom Jesus was living into. There's a reason Jesus was willing to sacrifice as much as he did in this world. And it's because the future he was living into was by far greater than anything he was going to experience here. If that wasn't constantly before him, then he would have easily succumbed to Satan's temptations. When Satan told him to sacrifice his his fidelity to God in order to be popular, or in order to do the big miraculous show, or in order to get the nations of the earth to fall under his rule. But Jesus was willing to sacrifice, we're told in the book of Hebrews, for the joy set before him. He endured the cross. But what is that joy? And this is what I want to insist. When the scriptures speak of the new heavens and the new earth, they speak of a new heavens and a new earth. They speak of a new creation. When Isaiah talks of that time, he talks about children playing near snakes' holes, and oxen and lions laying down together, lions eating straw like oxen. He talks about animals and places. In the book of Revelation, it talks about Jerusalem as the capital city of that new world. And it says all the nations on earth will come and bring their goods and their services to that capital city. And the gates will always be open and they'll never be closed. And God will dwell with people. It's a visceral, human-like, earth-like reality, but purified. And this is what I said in the sermon. I said, don't you think there'll be waterfalls in the new heavens and the new earth? But I think sometimes we don't. I think we think that if I don't see it here, I never will. I'll miss out. If I don't experience what this drug feels like, or what this alcohol feels like, or what this rush feels like, or if I don't get to place my eyes on this beautiful thing that's out there, then I'm going to come to the end of my life, and what am I going to regret? All the things I missed. And what I was saying is that if that was Jesus' heart, he never would have survived this night with faithfulness. If Jesus' eye were on all the things he was going to have to sacrifice to do what God was asking him to do, I do not think he would have survived it. In fact, you and I will not survive our times of trial if our eyes are on all the things we're losing. The hope of the gospel is on what is ahead. And we can live the lives he asks us to live here, because we are persuaded that there is nothing we could sacrifice, no experience we could miss, that from the perspective of the new heavens and earth will matter to us at all. Jesus seems so convinced that the future God had for him was where he wanted to be, that he did not ask this night to be spared suffering or anything else. He did ask, if God, if that's the future, is there another way for me to get there? And God doesn't allow that. But Jesus, once he's convinced this is the only road to go, he's willing to do it, because what is ahead is so far worth it. I'm not convinced that for us to see the kind of freedom that Jesus experienced in this world, for us to experience the kind of freedom from corruption and sin, the kind of freedom from the things that we're enslaved to, the patterns that we continue to live into over and over again, and we get the same results. I think we will never see the true fruit of the Spirit develop in us in such a holistic way that the world will understand what the Holy Spirit is doing in the church. I don't think we're ever going to see that happen until we finally stop worrying about what we miss, about what we're losing. There is nothing that could short-circuit our holiness more than putting our eyes too fixedly on this place. That's my fear of bucket lists. I think instead, like Jesus, we should have a list of things we're trying to learn that will benefit us in the world to come. Have you thought about what you want to do for a career in the new heavens and the new earth? Are you living into that reality? Do you really believe it? See, I think we say it and we want to believe it. I think each of us probably in our back pocket has a little something we keep to ourselves just in case this is all we've got. I think the challenge for us as we look at Jesus is to recognize, and I preached on what Jesus did. I mean, he prayed, he entered into the presence of God, and he was concerned for the people in his life, and that kept him centered. But probably more than any of those things was that Jesus had a clear line of sight on what was ahead. And it was what was ahead that kept him from falling back. But sometimes I think we think mostly about this world. Are you ready? Are you living into what's next? This life is burdensome to us. But the Scriptures, it can be. Sometimes it's wonderful, but those seasons end. I think what the Scriptures tell us is that if there's any analogy for the world we live in right now, it is a womb. It's a place where humanity comes to maturation. But it is a world in which we are destined to be born out of, and then into the real world, God's world. Born sons and daughters of God. I think our hope is not that we need to accumulate experiences here so there are no regrets, but that we have to do whatever it takes here to live into the kingdom that God is calling us into. Because one day, that's the only reality that will matter. Meet people who've lived a long time on this earth, and a long time on this earth is about 100 years. I imagine that 1,000,000 years into the new heaven and new earth, that 100 years is not going to look so old. Are we ready for what's next? This is the hope of the gospel. The hope of the gospel is we've barely tasted what it means even to be alive. That we've barely seen the scope and the majesty of the creation of God. That we can barely appreciate the future he intends for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Paul says that none can imagine. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. Are you ready?